So, okay, Alenka, so let's probably, the taxation of digital business is actually a very hot topic at the moment, and everybody is kind of talking about it. But let's maybe start from the very basic as to what is a digital business.
Right, so there isn't anything defined per se, but what we seem to be having is native digital businesses are the ones that tend to have certain hallmarks, and they tend to be platform-based. They tend to the operations revolve around a lot of data, and they tend to rely to some or reasonable extent on the user base with which they interact. The digital is also seen in the traditional businesses where we see more and more technology being brought in, so that changes the way the operations work. And when we talk about various digital operating models, we tend to bucket them somewhere in between the marketplaces, content, the e-commerce business, for payment, the cloud businesses. The main category is scouting market. I think it's probably easier to go on a hallmark about the platform, the user base, and the use of data.
Okay, excellent. And in what you're talking about, especially around the user-based concept, are we still going back to the source and resident concepts of taxation, or are we talking about something extremely different in respect of digital businesses?
So you're right, there was a debate about the source and residence in the past. That has moved on into discussion about the taxing of the access to the market or taxing their consumption. I think we've even moved from that. And at the moment, discussion is around the contribution of the user base. And when we talked about the user base, it's a bit of a composite term and yet not very well defined. But what we mean by that is where you have a local population engaging with a digital business, and to that engagement, they either leave their personal data, digital footprint, the behavioral data, or they literally just contribute free content. That's what we call actively engaged user base. And that seems to have been, or at least the thinking is moving in that direction, that ought to be recognized as an input element into the value chain of the digital businesses. So it is a new term, and it's important because it then slots very nicely into the way the transfer pricing is done around the new digital business models.
Okay. And maybe just because, again, you've touched on the point around consumption and that they move away from consumption. Is taxation, and we've seen a lot of jurisdictions try and tax digital businesses based on VAT and excise. So what is the current thinking around the use of indirect taxation to tax? And when you talk about user-based concept, are we moving away from consumption? Or are we still in the consumption space?
It's probably a benefit that we should look at it. So on one level, you're right, there's still a discussion about levies, taxes on turnover, and a lot of unilateral measures are centered around taxes on turnover. And part of that is because turnover is easier to measure, it's also easier to implement, and it is under pressure. And a taxation of digital economy, that is probably where one would go. Because the alternative, the more longer term measures, require changes to the international taxation legislation, and that will take longer. So from that perspective, we are still seeing the majority of unilateral measures and also short-term measures by the EU and the OECD focusing on turnover-based measures, as opposed to anything else. That I don't think necessarily means that this is the same as in digital taxation tax on consumption. It is important to understand consumption, either VAT domain, is separate from the concepts that are driving the digital economy. But it does take a little bit to take to the international level, so that is understood and agreed and uniformly, or as uniformly as possible, implemented around the world.
Okay. And talking about implementation around the world and legislation, there are obviously, there's the proposals that are coming out from the EU. I think the OECD has its own project, and I saw some draft legislation from Italy. I'm not sure what the US is doing. Maybe you could just bring us all up to speed as to what the main actors, if I could call them that, are doing in respect of legislation and where we are at the moment.
That's a very good question. So after the OECD report on action on digital economy came out in 2015, we've seen a lot of unilateral measures, which has then prompted to ask the OECD to start looking at the interim report and the taxation, so that there will be a little bit of conformity around how that's being implemented. And we're expecting the OECD report to be issued on the 18th of April. You also write that the European Union is looking at its own proposal, and it's planning to issue its paper on the 21st of March, a month before the OECD. And there's a couple of other European countries and countries around the world that are considering measures, including the UK. There is, at the moment, a degree of coordination and discussion between the EU and OECD and various countries, because there is appetite around the world for there to be coordinated measures, and that time of some of these measures, short and long term, some sort of in alignment, because otherwise we will face a lot of double taxation. Whether in its time they would be closely aligned, I think that remains to be seen, but there certainly is appetite for it to be coordinated.
Okay. I mean, if I can just bring it a little bit to the local scenario, and one of the questions that one would have here is that if you're trying to attract digital business to headquarter in your country, to set up offices in your country, is there still room for one to create a tax favorable, if I could call it that way, a tax favorable regime for headquarters of digital businesses? And if so, how would that look? Would it be one where you through R&D, through favorable treatment of royalties, or that kind of thing? What would that look in today's, given all the proposals that are coming through?
Yeah, you're right. I think that it's important to recognize probably two sides of this. On one hand, it's taxation of the digital businesses that are selling that goods and services in a jurisdiction. On the other side, one needs to look at how does one attract investment. And the way the jurisdictions go about it is R&D regimes to review what are the qualifying criteria for the companies to be within those regimes, and what exactly do those incentives mean, particularly in terms of the cash flows for the smaller companies, which is important. And then there's also the various IP regimes, how are intangibles treated. We know that in a digital environment, most of intangibles are internally generated. So the recognition of generated intangibles and what sort of treatment really lower taxation rate. In fact, all of that is quite important for the companies to attract the headquarters of the digital businesses. And then, of course, there's always a local grants for particular technologies in particular areas. So all of three measures have been implemented and considered by the government.
Okay. And again, just bring it local in terms of the reform that Kenya is trying to do to its Income Tax Act. The one question I think that's an underlying theme that's going through is how much should actually be in the main taxation and what should be done through sort of regulations and guidance and rely on, say, OECD best practice. Given how digital businesses are still evolving and how quickly they change and the nature changes, is there sort of any use in terms of putting concrete principles into the main legislation, or how do you think that countries should try and cope with legislating in this area?
So that is, you hit the nail on the head. The digital businesses, the digital economy itself is very fast-moving, very changing. So if one focuses on specific digital business models today and legislates for them, it might be that in a year or two, those are not the one where there's a perceived mismatch in taxation, and the new models have been developed that potentially need to be a target of local taxation measures. So probably that there is something around basing legislation on either the hallmarks of what is trying to be achieved, or trying to legislate through relying on the guidance that is produced, for example, by OECD, or some examples in the EU, and then try and see if one can bring that in the legislation indirectly, using OECD guidance as a best practice, as opposed to trying to be very definitive in a local legislation, because that might just mean continuous changes to that level.
Okay, excellent. And if the other sort of part of that is you can come up with all types of legislation, but if these businesses are are digital businesses. They're not really physically present in any one jurisdiction, or at least in your local jurisdiction. How can you enforce these rules? Is it going to be we come up with the rules and hope that these digital companies will actually comply with them, or how exactly can one enforce rules on these companies?
And that indeed is the difficulty. How do you enforce the compliance with those rules? So one of the ways that we've seen done is, for example, when there's a marketplace or intermediary that hosts or brings together the buyers and suppliers, it was legislated that the intermediary itself needs to ensure that the companies that it allows onto the platforms do comply with the local legislation, and they register and then pay their due taxes. That would be one of them. But in the majority of cases, I think one is relying on companies being aware that there is legislation, registering and paying taxes. There's probably something to be said around use of technology for ease of registration and payment. So that's something that's being at the moment considered in the EU proposals. So it's probably a combination of measures, but there is, you're absolutely right, there is that risk. You are relying on companies being aware of legislation and complying and paying their taxes.
Okay, excellent. And maybe just in closing, if you had a wish list of what you want to see in the draft proposals that are going to be issued this month, what key things would you be looking for, or what key things would you be looking to see in those proposals?
So I would certainly be looking for the coordination at the global or at least the regional level, so we're not ending up in any legislation with very particular, very localized measures, because that is really quite hard for the business. And reliance on the legislation that particularly some of the rules around the transfer pricing and the rules around the recognition of PE thresholds. And when we're talking about the taxing rights and the recognition of the direct nexus PE thresholds, it's trying to be as specific and as practical as possible. So by that I mean being specific on what thresholds one is using and setting them high enough that they only cap what is considered to be actively engaged locally, as opposed to setting thresholds quite low, creating burden for the jurisdictions without necessarily a lot of tax receipts for countries.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Alenka. I really appreciate you having this discussion with us, and I'm sure most of our viewers are going to be quite informed from this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Alenka. Sorry about all that technical